Good morning, everyone. I'm Daniela Fair. I'm the publisher of Defense One, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this morning to Defense One's Space and Satellite Communications morning briefing. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. If you haven't already done so, please silence your cell phones, but don't turn them off. We want you to be a part of the conversation today, and we encourage you to tweet your comments, your questions, and your thoughts at hashtag DEF1Space. That's DEF1 Space. This event would not be possible without the generous support of our underwriters today, SES Government Solutions. And with us today is Peter Haney. Retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Peter Haney was named President and CEO of SES Government Solutions in January 2015. In his previous role, he served as the Corporate Vice President for Development for SES Government Solutions. Please join me in welcoming Peter to the podium for some brief remarks.
Thank you, Daniela. Good morning. That was pretty good. One more time. Good morning. Yeah, there we go. Get charged up here. As Daniela mentioned, I'm Pete Haney from SES Government Solutions. We are proud to be the co-host here and underwrite this event. This is really bringing a lot of great people to the table right before the holidays. We have a group of world-class speakers out in front of us here, and I see a lot of friends in the audience. Rosie, Leo, Rick Skinner, and a whole host of others. There's a really great space collection here today. Thank you to Defense One Satellite Communications for co-hosting and sponsoring this activity. They did work out just a world-class group of speakers. We have Winston Beauchamp, who's the Principal DoD Space Advisor and the Deputy Undersecretary for Space. We have Chirag Parikh, now at NGA, but he used to be at the National Security Council for Space Policy. We have Robert Tarleton, the SMC Director of the MILSATCOM Program Office, and a recent PhD, a successful candidate, I should say, Dr. Brian Whedon from the Secure World Foundation. Brian, congratulations. How about a round of applause? 2 weeks ago, I guess, right? Many of you probably saw a CNN clip about a week and a half ago. And if you don't have it, there's a link that you can get and see it. And it was pretty well done. Now, some people don't like it. I just thought it was provocative, and I think all of us should probably take a moment and look at that. And the segment was A War in Space, the Next Battlefield. And one of the things that these senior leaders have been doing is trying to figure out how do we make our DoD and our space systems in general more resilient. And so you couldn't have a better group of people to be able to talk about those subjects. And you might even be able to hear from them about what the next administration is going to do, but we'll leave that to the speakers. One of the things that SES does is we provide a wide range of both MEO and GEO solutions, and we do everything from a bandwidth for supporting Army operations to complex hosted payloads. And one of the things that we'd like to be known for as a responsive industry partner to help support this more resilient space architecture and how we're going to fight in this brave new world. So with that, I just have a quote from General Hyten when he was the Air Force Space Commander, now the U.S. STRATCOM Commander, thankfully. He said, the future space enterprise will be built by changing how we architect, develop, acquire, and operate our space systems. It's a pretty big challenge to all of us, but I think together we can do it. And now I would like to turn it over to the moderator for today. And thank you for attending. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Peter. We really appreciate your support and your comments this morning. As the panel assembles on stage for our conversation on space and satellite communications, I just wanted to introduce Patrick Tucker. He is our technology editor at Defense One, and I encourage all of you to follow his coverage on the site and welcome him this morning to start the conversation. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all this morning for coming out. I really appreciate it. So I'm Patrick Tucker, Technology Editor of Defense One. We're going to go down the line here, and everybody's going to introduce themselves after I sort of introduce them. Next to me, Brian Whedon, Technical Advisor, Secure World. Chirag Parikh, who is at NGA, heads space strategies there. Mr. Robert Tarleton Jr. at Milsatcom, he's the director. And everyone knows Winston Beauchamp, Deputy Undersecretary, Space over at the Air Force. So the way it works is I'll ask some questions, but you guys, this is one of those events where the audience is certainly going to know more about this stuff than me. So I'll ask questions, but if you have a question, raise your hand. I'm not going to hold them till the end. We're going to start getting in the conversation just, as we sit here. We've all had coffee and we're all ready to go. As these folks introduce themselves, I'll just sort of explain very briefly my angle on all this. I had a great opportunity earlier this year to go out to Schriever and Air Force Base in Colorado and see the room where they steer the GPS constellation. And it's pretty incredible, and I'll tell you why, because it's impossible to understate the importance of GPS right now in terms of not only the way the military operates, but the way stock markets around the world operate. Precision navigation and timing, I mean, it's enormous. When ONR first developed this capability, I don't think they could ever have anticipated it would be so heavily utilized both by the military and by the commercial world. And this constellation is steered by really about 5 people. The average age I would say is 22. They sit right here behind a bank of compact monitors that look about as old as them. And they're so familiar, and they're so familiar with the way these satellites operate that they actually know when they're like visually seeing an anomaly that if it was an airman who was there that was a little less experienced might trigger alarms in Washington, D.C. So the most important space asset that I think I can conceive of is in this sort of fragile transition state. And so we're talking about today all the ways we can create new capability, take that capability and make sure that it is permanent for the next generation through a variety of different strategies, through a lot of great investment, through the use of great ideas. And so with that, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, beginning with you, Brian.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. So I was asked to start off by sort of kind of laying the background for what's going on in the space world and why that is causing both opportunities and challenges for the topic today. You know, we've been doing things in space since the 1950s, and it's really been in the last decade or so that those of us that work in the field are starting to see a pretty radical amount of change, and that's being driven by several trends. One of those is that space is becoming more international. Early on, there were only 2 countries operating in space. Now there's at least 60 countries that have at least 1 satellite. There's more joining the club every year, and they're doing it not only for socioeconomic development, but also for national security reasons, for commercial reasons. We're also starting to see a much bigger proportion of space activities being done by the commercial sector, the private sector. Space started off as a government endeavor, but now that is changing, and it's changing pretty rapidly. And we're on the cusp of seeing a kind of a revolution, or some people say a renaissance, in commercial space that is going to start doing all sorts of interesting things that we've done in the past: communications, remote sensing, PNT, and also a whole bunch of potentially new things that we haven't seen before. Space is also becoming much more transparent. There's a lot more sources of data about what happens in space that are increasingly outside of the government's hands. And that's kind of growing awareness about things that are going on in space and awareness of activities, including both commercial activities and government activities. And finally, I'll say that there's also a growing use of space for military and national security purposes by the United States, but also other countries. And all of these things together generate challenges. Physical congestion, radio frequency congestion, and also the potential for space to be part of future conflicts. And that is a huge set of challenges and also opportunities that the military is trying to deal with.
Okay, Chirag?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Happy to be back out here in the circuit, so to speak. sitting alongside my friend Winston Brian. Where I sit today at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, I think is on the leading edge of transformation of the environment that Brian is talking about here, Dr. Brian is talking about here. You know, that's what attracted me to the organization in the first place. For those of you who may not have known me in the past life, you know, from 2010 to earlier this year, I was at the National Security Council helping lead a charge of space resiliency, space protection, space security measures, several discussions with the president, major investments changed because of these conversations, and it was a huge transformation. I think what you look at in the world of space security and space resiliency is, boy, if you go back to 1976, 40 years ago, there is presidential documentation from the Ford administration that talks about the challenges. We have more commercial capabilities. We have a threat from the Soviet Union. We must have better situational awareness. Oh my gosh, we've been talking about this for 40 years, right? But the environment has changed. War extending into space is now considered part of a, you know, some are considering it part of a conventional conflict. And so we've had that conversation for a long time, and finally, leadership across the spectrum, we are now making that turn. In a similar vein, now that I sit at NGA, I sit in the source office here, we're responsible for all this new stuff coming in. It's no longer just bringing in national technical means. We have a great partner in the National Reconnaissance Office, but no longer are they our only partner. To be quite honest, for the past decade, they're not our only partner. We've had Digital Globe as an excellent partner as well, and we're expanding. And it's not just all the new space capabilities that are on orbit and they're coming up there. We recently signed a contract with Planet for effectively a skin of the earth every 15 days. We're looking at airborne commercial capabilities and how does that bring into the GeoInt spectrum. We're looking at open source information. We're not looking at pixels anymore. We're looking for you all, for industry, for academia, for foreign governments to help us provide us knowledge of change, right? So we can look across the spectrum, not just spectrum of capabilities, but literally the electromagnetic spectrum to be able to prosecute a problem and then be able to then lean ourselves to working on the hardest problems. We want you to do the analysis for us and the things that we find routine these days. Just like Digital Globe provides us 90% of our commercial capabilities, provide us 90% of our foundation geospatial intelligence capabilities. That's in a pixel basis. What if you all did that? What if industry did that? We are in a huge transitionatory phase right now. We are already in the government talking about the architecture after next. And so as we try to figure out what's happening in 2030, we need to first understand what's happening in the commercial climate, what's happening in the foreign climate, understand what's happening in the security climate, and then based upon that, apply our capabilities towards what we do best, which is solve the hard problems with, you know, with the resources that we have, and then leverage commercial and foreign capabilities to the maximum extent practical. So I'll leave it at that and have questions later.
Thanks so much, Robert.
Morning. I think we tend to think of SATCOM in terms of categories: narrowband, which the Navy procures; wideband, protected, which is both tactical and strategic. Then we have the commercial system. So we're at the point with our military systems where we have to make decisions. What is the next generation system when we start this acquisition process for these systems? One of the things that's kicking off very soon is the analysis of alternatives for the wideband SATCOM. And that will be looking at several areas, but trying to really bring in the commercial industry, international partners to be part of the AOA and then the resulting architecture. So what's the right mix of commercial systems with a purpose-built military system? How do we take advantage of the more rapid improvements that commercial industry can make on SATCOM? Part of that AOA also will be fed by a pilot program that will reach out to industry, a series of short task orders to help draw specific topics and feed into the AOA to help enlighten and answer the questions that the AOA team has. We also have some pathfinders going on. Last year we bought a on-orbit, Pete would know this, transponder over Africa to meet a requirement. Actually bought the bandwidth on a commercial system. Pathfinder 2 we hope to get going here very soon, which will actually buy the transponder or the bandwidth before launch so that we can potentially influence that design, and hopefully that'll work its way across the rest of the constellation. Then there's 3, 4, 5 pathfinders to look at the ground system, things like pooled bandwidth and other things we'd like to draw on from a commercial constellation. But all this is being done with the space enterprise vision in mind that Pete mentioned. Certainly, as we look at what do we need to do in the 2030 plus time frame, how do we make sure we've got the systems, resilience, and as we all know, we are in a continually growing, contested, and congested environment. Thank you.
Winston.
Thank you. So as my colleagues have mentioned here today, there's a great deal of change going on in space. In the Air Force, we've taken the threat seriously. We understand the emerging capabilities of other nations around the world. We've studied it carefully, and we understand what steps have to be taken in order to counter those threats. As Brian mentioned, space is in the process of normalizing to be treated just like every other domain, so that we understand what space's role is in a multi-domain operations concept. It supports every other domain, and every other domain supports space. The Air Force has taken this transition very, very seriously. Just look at all of the changes that have occurred just in the last year. We've changed the way we exercise. In July, at the Red Flag exercise, the Air Expeditionary Commander, somebody who's always been an air operator, was Colonel Deanna Burt, the commander of the 50th Space Wing. And we've changed the way the relationship between air and space operates, both in exercise, and that's how you train your next generation of space warriors. We've changed the way we collaborate with our international partners, and the war game, Schriever War Game is a great example of that, having invited more countries than ever to participate and at a much deeper level than ever before, so that we can understand what it takes to operate as a coalition in a multi-domain conflict. We've changed the way we present space forces to the combatant commanders by building a space mission force that understands what it takes to operate through a contested environment. We've changed our ops centers, and we're well on the road of modernizing our battle management command and control capability. And we've changed the way we integrate with our intelligence community partners. Much closer collaboration than ever, because when you're in a contested environment, you have to understand what your partners are doing in response to a threat. And we've taken advantage of big changes in industry as well. We mentioned the space renaissance, and both Chirag and Bob's comments talk about different mission areas, but the same concept. Ensuring that we can deliver mission capability through multiple layers instead of putting all your eggs in one basket, so that we've got a distributed, a proliferated, and diverse set of capabilities to deliver to the warfighter and make it very, very difficult for any potential adversary to deny those capabilities. So to wrap it all up, we understand the situation. We've got a very comprehensive plan to address the threats and to modernize our capabilities, both in terms of the systems themselves and how we operate in those systems. I'm looking forward, based upon everything that's gone on in the last year, I'm looking forward to the next year to see how much we can accomplish. And what we really need is the flexibility to continue to work those elements of the plan.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So like I said before, if you've got a question, raise your hand, but I'm going to kick us off because you talked about the need for resiliency, steps that you're taking in that direction, making sure that capability remains as distributed. William Shelton, he's the former head of Space Command. I had an interesting interaction with him back in 2014 where he identified from his perspective the top threats to the U.S. in space. They were jamming, lasers, and nukes. So first, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about each of those and how your strategy acknowledges and defeats those threats. Winston.
Yeah. So jamming lasers and nukes.
Nukes, yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. that got good clicks, I tell you. All right.
Story, coffee book.
That's right, that's right. Well, the good news is I can talk about all of them
Okay.
in the same vein, and that is our approach for mission assurance addresses multiple types of threats.
Okay.
In the sense that if we can evolve from an architecture where we deliver capability from a single layer of identical nodes in space to one where there are not, we maintain the exquisite national systems that we've had and we've enjoyed the services of for so long, and augment them with systems that are delivered through commercial capability, through international capability, and possibly something that's responsive in nature, then it would be, any of those threats would be very difficult for any of them to hold our capability at risk, because they wouldn't know necessarily where the capability is being delivered from. Right now, if somebody wanted to deny SATCOM services, for example, they pretty much know what satellites our capability is being delivered from. But in the future, it's going to be much more difficult for them to see, because not only are we going to be leveraging the services in the baseline of a vast number of commercial SATCOM services, but we'll have interoperability on the ground such that our comlinks can hop from one satellite to the next, from one constellation to the next, from one frequency to the next, and make it very, very difficult for any constellation, any collection of jammers or lasers or whatever to deny that capability, because they won't know where we are.
Okay. So a little bit more on that. There's discussion about relying a little bit more on European satellites. And if you could talk a little bit to that and how that creates some of this distributed capability, and how you might actually have to think about different architectures for satellites in order to achieve that sort of flexibility, because right now there's a ComSat, there's a sat with a great big imager on it, and creating a single set that can do multiple things is sort of key to that. That's actually a huge physics challenge.
So for a long time, we equated, for example, PNT with GPS.
Yeah.
Right? They were considered to be the same thing. Once you look at it, though, you realize that you can deliver, and PNT is fundamentally a distributed system, which means you deliver GPS as distributed. You can deliver that capability using multiple satellites. You need the signals of multiple satellites to get your precise location and timing.
Right.
When you add additional layers to that constellation by introducing Galileo, or the services of the Japanese QZSS system, or the Indian system, or frankly, even the Russian and Chinese systems, you multiply the resilience of your architecture overall, because you make it very difficult for any one of those systems to be denied.
Yeah.
And if I have the ability to say, I can ingest 5 or 6 signals, if one of them starts to be messed with, I can tell really quickly, because they'll be voted out by the others. And so our strategy is not to resist the others that are bringing on new systems, whether it be SATCOM or PNT or other capabilities, but to bring them in so that we have an ability to take advantage of the resiliency that provides.
Okay. Touching really quickly on some of the things that we're going to expect these satellites to do. So you mentioned separating PNT and GPS a little bit, and that creates a more difficult target for any enemy that wants to cause massive economic disruption in the United States. There's also the improvements that are being made to the GPS signal for the military, the M code. So my understanding, given to me by you a few minutes ago, is that in the next 5 or so years, military satellites are expected to be sort of M code capable, but that's hardly the end of the story, because there has to be continuous improvement and innovation in delivering that signal. Otherwise, that's an irrelevant, quickly irrelevant capability. Could you talk a little bit about what that sort of thing means for the future of military satellites, and the future of capability on those new systems outside of what we're today familiar with?
This is a great example of the overall resilience strategy, because M-code capable satellites have been being launched for more than 10 years. So it's not like this is something that's brand new. This capability was envisioned by our predecessors as something that was necessary in an increasingly electromagnetically challenged environment, in order to both burn through jamming, but also to be an encrypted signal that would make it very difficult for someone to spoof.
Right.
But the idea here is, for the way we're dealing with this with GPS, is exactly applicable to our larger constellation. deliver a suite, a consistently improving set of capabilities with each new block of system. For example, we're looking at higher regional power. That makes it more difficult for somebody to deny in a regional sense, as well as on the SATCOM side, going to take advantage of the industrial trend towards smaller spot beams of higher power, so that jammers would have to be much more numerous and much closer to the action than they would have before to deny a signal. All of that is extremely consistent with the strategy to diversify and proliferate your capabilities and change the cost equation for any adversary.
Right.
Make it economically unfeasible for them to deny this capability. So what we're doing with GPS is directly analogous to everything we're doing with all the other mission areas as well.
Okay, so Mr. Schaefer, to you, because we are talking about not just an increasingly crowded GEO or LEO orbit, we're also talking about an increasingly crowded spectrum. And one of the things that space offers is increased capability in electronic warfare through perhaps the creation or the discovery of new waveforms and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about how you see future space, U.S. space assets playing a role in electronic warfare and how we protect that? Mr. Schaefer.
Who? I'm sorry?
Mr. Schaefer. Hold on, did I get the name right? Robert.
Oh, look at me. All right.
Oh, man. Sorry, Robert. Gosh. All right. Yeah. Future waveforms.
All right, so one of the things we have that's bringing capability here is a government-developed protected tactical waveform, PTW, that is government-owned, frequency agnostic, and that's already been proven over not only WGS but some of the commercial systems. And just recently, we awarded contracts for what we're calling protected tactical service field demo. We'll actually look at building hubs and the management system to use PTW over WGS. And what it does is it brings that additional protection, if you will. So we talk about jamming. Any way we can gain an additional level of protection, we're looking at that. That waveform will also, I should have mentioned PTS with PTW. That will eventually go across not only WGS but the commercial systems. Then we'll follow that up with a series of protected tactical systems, an enterprise system, and then eventually a protected tactical satellite. But we're always looking at how do we avoid or how can we handle additional jamming. So PTW is one of those that I think has been a good approach, that we own all the rights, we can use it, we can give it out, just you have to meet the specs, the interfaces, but it can be used on a wide variety of systems, commercial or military.
Is there any concern about putting those sorts of capabilities? Because we're talking about greater reliance on commercial partners. That's not the sort of thing that an EW capability would rely on. That's something that would be very specific to military satellites, I imagine. So you say that's right.
Well, if you want to use the term EW in jamming, maybe somewhat synonymously, if that's what you're getting at, it will.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly, Winston mentioned the spot beams and how much more difficult it is to be detected. So those are some of the capabilities being brought and even ahead of us in some cases in the military by the commercial systems. But by adding any level of protection, we're gaining that additional jamming resistance. And commercial systems is part of that equation. As we go forward on this wideband SATCOM AOA, and we're looking at solutions. I think one thing I failed to mention earlier was when I mentioned the categories of SATCOM, those lines have blurred some. So wideband, commercial, even to some extent the protected tactical requirements that need to be met for the warfighter aren't as separate or defined or segmented as they used to be. So as we go forward and look at these, some of these future architectures, we'll be looking across a spectrum of capabilities, purpose-built and commercial, to help meet those requirements.
Okay, thank you. And sorry for bungling your name. The GPS signal to my brain was momentarily jammed. So, Chirag, let's talk a little bit about this amazing deal that India you announced today with Planet Labs, Digital Globe. To the naked eye, it almost seems like they're competitors because they both provide imagery. But that's not how you see it. That's not the case. Tell us a little bit about what Planet Labs does, the capability you're hoping to get from them, and how that is going to change what you do.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, not competitors, you know, from an NGA perspective and from a U.S. government perspective. I mean, this is providing us the ability to augment intelligence gaps. It's been providing us the ability to have resiliency. We are a source agnostic organization, and we will take the feeds that we can get from commercial capabilities that are in the marketplace. Digital Globe, let's talk about a third entity as well.
Yeah.
National Reconnaissance Office.
Okay.
Historically have provided incredible amounts of data, large volumes of data, timely data, exquisite capabilities, and are and will continue to do so. What Digital Globe provides is not in competition to Planet or to NRO, it's complementary. NRO data is classified data.
Yeah.
And so therefore, as we, and especially the DoD, fight in a coalition environment, we need to be able to share with our coalition warfighters.
Yeah.
Right? Digital Globe provides us that kind of capability. Future capabilities, a lot of these large LEO constellations with sub-meter resolution are going to even further provide that. Now we move from Digital Globe to Planet. Planet, what it provides is an increased revisit. Now, resolution's coarser.
Yeah, different.
But now, can you imagine this? When their architecture is up, and other people are looking at a similar vein, every day, every spot of the Earth, not just can be imaged, will be imaged.
Yeah,
And
what's the revisit rate for them?
eventually, it's going to be every day.
Every day.
Every day, the entire skin of the landmass of the Earth shall be covered.
Yeah.
That's just one company.
Yeah.
You add all these other companies, some more mature ones are coming up here soon as well. And you have a constellation of constellations. This is no longer a space problem.
Right.
This is no longer a resiliency issue. This is a big data issue.
Right.
Right? I don't have the assets to manage and broker all of these capabilities at once.
Yeah.
We don't have the imagery analysts to sit there and do what the director of NGA, Robert Cardillo, did when he started 30 plus years ago, which is get a single pixel. You're responsible for this latitude and longitude of Earth, and you figure it out what's happening.
Yeah.
Now, what Planet offers, what others offer, is the ability for change detection, for terrain feature extraction, for human geography, and highlight those things that change to put the best and most brightest minds at NGA to focus just on those things that are the hardest intelligence problems that we need to work on. If we need to monitor what ships are in and out of ports, that's a routine thing.
Yeah.
That analysis can be, we believe, outsourced to commercial industry. So it's no longer just the architecture of systems anymore. And the way that the director is dividing this up is three ways. We want to lead the community by being able to explain what's happening, by being able to take all this, make cohesive all this chaos of stuff happening right now, right? We want to lead with partnerships with, not just with commercial, foreign, and those of you that are in the academic institutions, it's not just about putting satellites in space. We're interested in what you see with the data that comes down. And so partnering with academic institutions is developing best practices. What's good for one industry, what's good for the oil and fishing and coal mining industry is probably good for national security stuff applications as well. Yeah. So that's a lead side of things. We don't, and next thing, and this is my organization and source, we want to broker information. We don't want to sit there and just push buttons as a cash register. We want to basically say, I need a little of this commercial for the warfighter, I need a little of this NRO for the exquisite, I need a little of this commercial analytic services for the day-to-day routine. Yeah. And then finally, we want to differentiate. And this goes back to what I said earlier, which is effectively, we want to work on those things that we are uniquely suited for, we are uniquely missioned for. If we have commercial partners and international partners, we will spread the wealth. Yeah. So that's kind of where we're going right now.
Yeah, the ability to look at any point in the globe and see how it changed from the day before is nuts. This is an incredible new capability that we're all going to actually have. Planet Labs, they came and they actually did a demonstration over at the Atlantic. These satellites aren't huge, they're actually really small. They're working with a bunch of media outlets, and I'm dying to get information about them to talk, create one wonderful stories about how what's happening in eastern Ukraine, what's happening right now in Syria, what's happening right now in Africa, places that I don't have access to as a journalist. And this is something that also speaks to, I think, a really marvelous transformation that I've observed at NGA under Robert Cardillo. This sense that you can have, not only can you have a more transparent intelligence agency, but you must have it, because the volume of information that we're going to be produced that's going to be relevant to the national security mission is just too great to be siloed anymore. And he's put in place a lot of really interesting and I think really important changes in that regard. One of them is this new applications for machine learning and artificial intelligence, and understanding that the vast majority of data that you're working with is not, in terms of what is intelligence, is not space-based. How does some of those new machine learning and AI techniques, how does that change your job going forward? In terms of what you have available of human analysts, and in terms of what they're able to do.
So the challenge is not just a technological challenge, it's a culture challenge, right? NGA still, while I think leading the community in this type of change, inherently still a relatively young organization. It's only been 20 years since the merger of effectively NPIC and DMA, Defense Mapping Agency and National Photographic Interpretation Center. And so there's a lot of people who know national technical means analysis, and we will continue to need to have people like that. The change is this: when you're talking about artificial intelligence, you're talking about machine learning, there's going to be an incredible need for data scientists, for computer programmers, people who are no longer just looking at a single, whether it's a single pixel, single image, a single data set. Now they're looking at multitudes of data sets, and they're not only looking at it from pictures taken from satellites, over denied areas. You go on to social media feeds, you go on to open source accounts. There is a vast wealth of information that we consider to be geospatially relevant, geospatially useful, and complementary. Just like Digital Globe is complementary to NRO, and Planet is complementary to Digital Globe. All this open media, all this open information on the internet is complementary to this entire thing. And this goes back to the fact of being able to operate in the open. Whereas in the past, we took classified information, and maybe if we had the time or the capacity, augment it with open source and unclassified information. You're almost flipping this now. Where you need to have artificial intelligence and machine learning go and scrape all that information that's unclassified first. Make it as widely disseminable as possible, whether it's to foreign partners, to media, to our State Department brethren who may not have top secret clearances. Make that information available. And then only in that highest level of sensitive information, augment it with, when I go back to the differentiate thing. Things that only we can do, the things that only is applicable for government purposes, that industry does not see currently the value of investing in, extremely high NIRS level imagery because there's not a business plan for that at this point.
Right. It's absolutely fascinating. I remember a couple of years ago, there were a lot of stories out about how Wall Street companies were buying up satellite imagery so that they could take pictures of parking lots around Christmas time, because that was an indicator of how the Christmas season was going to play out. And that's a commercial interest, but you can do the same thing with parking lots in hospitals. And then you're going to get a sense of an epidemic that's going to take off.
There's a long storied history of monitoring pizza deliveries at the Pentagon as well. So, where the Soviets would take pictures of the Pentagon and look at the pizza delivery trucks, and if they were coming in late at night, something was up, right? So,
Oh, the Russians.
Yes.
So I want to remind everybody, if you've got a question, feel free to raise your hand, and we're going to start. Oh, here we go. We've already got some folks. Let's start it off with, is it Sydney Freeberg? Is that right? From Breaking Defense?
I'm coming.
Just might be Sydney Freeberg from Breaking Defense.
All right, hold on. He's got a microphone coming to you, Sydney.
Or as somebody at yesterday's Defense One event said, the guy with the hair.
Okay.
This is a question, well, for everybody, but particularly for you, sir. This multi-domain concept that is, the Army has its version. Certainly, General Goldfein is very enthusiastic about this concept. But this is very hard to implement, it seems, because historically, ground and other domain commanders are thought, well, space is this utility. I flip a switch, my space assets do their magical thing in the back room. And now we're talking about having to deal with space assets maybe coming and going, having to switch which space assets are using. and even sort of somehow coordinating maneuver, as it were, of what you're doing in space with maneuver on the ground. So that's A, a huge cultural challenge, and B, a huge command and control challenge. You know, beyond the things you're doing technically to make sure the system is more resilient, how do you address those command and control and cultural challenges of people, you know, on the space side thinking like maneuver warriors and people like maneuver warriors thinking about space?
So this was a very similar question to one asked 20 years ago when the Air Operations Center came into being. And in the AOC, it started out as, let me find a way to do command and control of the air war, and what it evolved into was the linchpin that integrated everything from air to ground. We believe that something very similar will occur when a multi-domain ops center capability is introduced, because that's where all the data lives. That's where all the information sits, and that's where the connections between the domains live. So what that means is I don't necessarily need to have a space warrior think about maneuver or a maneuver warrior think about space. In the same way that at the capability level, I now have multiple layers in an architecture delivering mission, I have multiple layers of battle management command and control. So that the individual maneuver warrior on the ground doesn't have to care about which satellite he's pointing to. All he knows is he has assured comms. Because in the next layer up, they're doing the adjudication between, oh, this system is receiving interference. We might be getting jammed soon. I'm going to switch over to this one. The point is that that change should be transparent to the guy on the ground. All he knows is he has a demand signal for a certain amount of uninterruptible and uninterrupted comms and navigation. So the layered concept.
A guy in Afghanistan would say, I want air support now, and he doesn't give a damn whether it's a B-1 or an F-18 or
That's
a
right.
Predator or
That's right.
Afghan Air Force biplane, whatever they got.
That's right. I need that bad guy on the other side of the hill to go away. And then the Air Operations Center figures out how best to do that. The same will be true inside the Multidomain Ops Center. So that you don't have to, A, push more data down than is absolutely necessary, and you don't have to control it all from the top.
Excellent. Tom.
I'd like to ask a more kind of holistic question, but it's important. The idea of the United States has used GPS to say for advantages in warfighting capacity. But other countries, including China and to a lesser degree Russia, have come up with their own equivalents to GPS. So the question is, when you talk about commercialization of space assets, the two questions come up. First of all, would there be a conflict, let's say, between the American GPS system and the Chinese and the Russian equivalents to that sort of thing? Would it be a commercial type of competition? And or if there were not a commercial type of competition per se, the second question is, would you have these competing systems if they were in some sense heterodyned or matched to some of the American requirements, making GPS hackable? So in other words, as to give in crucial real-time circumstances problems, let's say for what you might call examples, you want to use a drone or you want to use something else or a predator that does its job or something, other type of instrumentation. Do you have an issue of hackability of the system?
Okay, I'm going to let both of Brian and Winston take that.
So to some extent, that challenge is already being addressed.
I know it is,
yeah.
but how secure is that?
So let me put it this way. So there was a decision in the early 2000s in the Bush administration that the U.S. would have a strategy of basically co-opetition, right? So the plan was to cooperate on the civil signals, but have different competitive military signals.
Yeah, I know that, but what I'm saying is that has the hackability issue been addressed?
You want me to touch on that for
Sure.
briefly, and then we'll throw it back to Brian? Well, the first thing I wanted to comment on was the construct of the question. And I would hesitate a while before I would call the Chinese or the Russian systems to be equivalents to GPS. So they have significant differences in the way they're designed that will not change over the next 10 years. The problems that they're having in implementation, perhaps they'll resolve them. But fundamentally, Beidou is a regional system, right? It's not intended to be global. And the GLONASS system has had enduring challenges for decades, at both maintaining global coverage and in the integrity of the signal itself. And the way they're designed are just fundamentally different from GPS. So, and from a commercial competition, so from a commercial competition perspective, it's not a commercial issue because we don't charge for GPS. It is freely available to the world. And so if folks want a reliable signal globally, they know they can count on GPS. The other systems come and go, and they may or may not be available. But when they are available, if it makes sense for us to use them, we will. So I don't believe that we are in a position of equivalence for either of those systems or will be in the foreseeable future. But we are working with our allies who are delivering PNT systems so that together we can deliver a robust PNT architecture.
So I actually have kind of a related question, not at looking at Russian capabilities, but this year China launched the Mica satellite. It's a supposedly quantum communications satellite. A lot of people have some questions about it. Is that's something that you're looking at?
Vastly overhyped.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask Winston. Is this something?
We're very aware of what's going on with that satellite. It's part of the constellation of systems that are monitored closely. Different people have different definitions of what being a quantum satellite means.
Okay.
And so this is research and development, really. And that's what we're watching it to be. But it's one of the areas under close examination.
If, as a anti-satellite threat, if you had to put China on a scale of 1 to 10 right now, simply in terms of capability, not in terms of political will. 10 years ago, they demonstrated a missile that got to, I think, 23,000 feet. Is that or so?
No,
800
kilometers.
800 kilometers.
LEO.
In
2007, it was a LEO system, the ASAT system. What they've demonstrated since then is the ability to get to geosynchronous orbit.
Right, that's right. That's and they're also demonstrating an interesting research and development program based on quantum communications. I'd like you and Brian, I wonder if you could talk to how much time do you spend thinking specifically about China as a competitor in space?
Myself or the U.S. government?
The U.S. government and okay. Brian, yes.
I think the U.S. government spends quite a bit of time thinking about that. So let me consider it this way. You mentioned the war in space thing that was on CNN.
Yeah.
I think that was an interesting example of, the comments I have is there's some context that was missing for some of that.
Yeah.
So, for example, that show talked a lot about this so-called kamikaze satellite that the Russians have been demonstrating and alluded to that it might be the first of its kind.
Right.
Well, in reality, the Soviets had an operational kamikaze satellite system that started development and testing in the 1960s and was tested multiple times on orbit through the 1970s.
Yeah.
So I bring that up because there's a case where some of these capabilities are things that, the Soviet Union had decades ago that sort of went away or were mothballed with the end of the Cold War. And now what we're seeing in some cases is those programs or things that are similar capability are either being restarted or other countries such as China are starting to explore some of those technologies and capabilities. And there are a few cases where I think it's legitimate to say that there's new things being developed. Certainly if there is a direct ascent ASAT to GEO, that's certainly a new thing in terms of my knowledge has not been tested before. But a lot of these are in development, and it's really hard to gauge, particularly from my perspective of somebody on the outside looking at the open source data on this, how much of this is exploration, how much of this is trying to see where the technology stands, how much of this is an actual development program to procure and get an operational capability. That can be kind of confusing to kind of sort all that out. But I can say that what we're seeing is sort of a resurgence and in some cases a proliferation of some of the capabilities that's going to lead to kinetic, jamming, laser, all sorts of other attacks that are capabilities that could be used to attack satellite systems.
Yeah, do you see a cosmetic resurgence or a real resurgence?
Yeah, so I agree with Brian. I would say that the U.S. government spends quite a bit of time keeping an eye on these programs. We get a lot of great data from the intelligence community about the development progress. I won't speculate on how much time Brian spends on it, because you got that answer from Brian already.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, Russia doesn't throw anything away.
Yeah.
Right? And they've continued to invest in this area. But remember where they're starting from an investment standpoint. It's still a fraction of what the U.S. spends on the space program. Now, and China is certainly progressing rapidly, but again, they're starting from a very low base.
Okay.
You know, fundamentally, we have a defensive posture in space. We're about protecting space capability that delivers great access and reach, not just to the military, but to U.S. and allied society as a whole. Our modern way of life is underpinned by services delivered from space. And so it's incumbent upon the Air Force and the Department of Defense to protect those capabilities, because it makes sense, just like we would in any other domain.
Sure.
Nobody seeks a conflict in space, and nobody would win a conflict in space, but we do know one thing, that we are so far beyond where these potential adversaries might be today, that there's no question but that we would prevail.
Okay. Tom, there in the back.
Tom Risen, I've been freelancing with Aerospace America. I got a question that's right in line with all this. There's a lot of security risks, obviously, but NASA Administrator Charles Bolden has been trying to build bridges with China's space program. And what are your hopes for this effort as we head into the Trump administration?
I'll turn that one to Brian.
So there was, a few weeks before the election, there was a space policy debate that had people from both campaigns. And if I recall, I think it was Bob Walker on the Trump side. I think both he and the others, and the Clinton surrogate, talked fairly favorably about some sort of cooperation and engagement with China. So whether or not you can translate what was said on the campaign trail to what would become actual policy, I don't know. But I think there is, I mean, certainly it's my sense, and I think there is a growing sense that having the only interaction with China in space be in a national security military context, I think is a problem. I think I would like to see some sort of either a commercial or a civil engagement to augment that. But there are some huge challenges to think about in doing so. Technology transfer is one of them. There are congressional restrictions on doing so. That's a big question to sort out. And the other question is it a bilateral engagement or is it an international multilateral engagement? The latter, that international engagement that includes China, might be a little more palatable from a domestic political question.
I think we had one over there. Yeah.
It's for the recording.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Pretty exciting, quite frankly. What I think every one of the speakers has brought up are exciting times. Innovation prevails. Commercial capabilities prevail in the investment side of things. But how, as a U.S. government, are we going to go ahead and acquire these capabilities? Now, Robert, you talked about Pathfinders. That's certainly one effort. But how are we going to get away from DISA and buying capacity on the spot market? And how do you go ahead and fund some of these more innovative activities?
Why don't you start, and I'll clean up.
Certainly part of the, you mentioned this, part of the problem we have is how our O&M rules and regulations are structured and how we can only buy, limited to 1 year. One of the things we've looked at on Pathfinder 2 is, can we use procurement dollars, but basically buy the transponders, as I mentioned. And we had a lot of legal discussion on that. We actually have had, frankly, to change our approach on Pathfinder 2, which is the approach to buy a transponder on a commercial satellite pre-launch. So we've already been down that road a little bit, trying to look at what needs to happen to allow the proper rules, what kind of funding can be used, and how long can you use it in those regulations. Fortunately, we've had folks like Representative Bridenstine being very supportive and engaging with him. He was out at LA, the Air Force Base there not too long ago. So those are the kind of things I think where we need to go is there's got to be certain flexibilities added into the regulations and the law if we want to really go where we think we need to go with the commercial systems, because there's no doubt we've got to draw on them much more than we have been.
Yeah, I'd just add on to that with respect to the what we're doing at NGA. We have a lot of Trekkie fans apparently at NGA, so we have this thing called Cyborg, which stands for, clearly the acronym came before the name. It stands for Commercial Initiative to Buy Operationally Responsive GeoInt. I can't make this kind of stuff up. So, but the concept of it is, I think, brilliant. You have a GSA account, you have a credit card. It's easy, you can buy software on GSA. We are setting up Cyborg, and we're working with GSA to set up a marketplace where we will provide unclassified orders. I need to know the disposition of these troops on this border. It's pretty routine stuff, right? Companies, all these different GeoInt companies that are out there can choose to provide us data of where they are, provide us the pixels. They could choose to do the analysis and make that purchase order right off of GSA contract. And so now we're not stuck into long-term acquisition contracts. We're not stuck into investing in a single company that may or may not exist in a few years, or certainly the business risks and so on and so forth. So we put out the market order, and then industry can come in and, with their capabilities, purchase that government requirement, and we will use it. So I think that's a novel way in which we're looking at it as well.
Wow, if only we could do that with stealth fighters, huh? All right, go ahead.
So I want to add on to that. There's another aspect to that. I mean, certainly I think there are places where there's too much, we'd say, regulation in terms of the acquisition side, or in terms of maybe even ITAR and the export controls. But there's also the case of how do we keep the sustainment of the innovation and even encourage more innovation? And that's almost a case where there's almost too little. You know, there's a lot of new space startup companies I know of that are looking for, you know, who in the U.S. government can tell us yes? Who can give us a license to go do this so we can go offer this great service? And that speaks to some of the challenges where, you know, we have some current buckets for agencies that can give license in certain areas, but there's new things coming along that don't fit in one of those areas. So how do you kind of, what I call, modernize that oversight to be able to give more ability to say yes, and more of what Representative Brian calls certainty to the commercial sector to help encourage more innovation, so when, you know, Chirag and others want to go out and buy that stuff, it's going to be there in the future.
All right, folks, I think we got time for actually just one more. Let's see. We'll go right here.
Good morning. My name is Jimmy White, and I'm with the Hyman Rickover Cybersecurity Workforce Training Initiative.
Okay, here we go. Got it.
And my question is, what are you doing to address how cybersecurity workforce will impact your industry in the public and private sector? And if you have any cybersecurity workforce training initiatives, we would love to work with you.
I'll start, and that is a concern of ours, is as we bring more and more commercial data into our ecosystem, we have to have a cyber secure awareness. We have to have improved operational security practices. We have to be quite honest, we have to be vigilant of counterintelligence capabilities as well. And so that is, as we adopt more and more commercial capabilities, and we are at the nascent stage of that, that is an underpinning layer of our commercial purchases and of our cooperation with commercial industry. We went through a lot, and Winston, when he was at NGA, went through a lot of this type of conversation as we partnered with Digital Globe. As we now start partnering with, potentially, tens of companies, if not more, who knows, that type of initiative, that type of wherewithal has to underpin every one of these types of contracts and services.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for showing up this morning. Please join me in thanking our panel for this great.
Just want to thank everyone here in the room today for joining us, and again to SES Government Solutions for their support this morning. We hope to see you at another Defense One event. Thanks so much.